Welcome everybody to our first and thirds event for this month. Today we have Dr. Joanna Stith visiting with us today about hearing loss and sensory integration, and she's going to share with us her knowledge on that. So I'd like to hand it over to her.
It's great to see you all today. Many faces I recognize, and it's wonderful to see you and just bring back memories too of when they were so little and I had the opportunity to work with you, and would love to get updates if you want to send them to me, because it's always fun just to hear. I have loved living in Colorado. Gosh, it's been 19 years, and I work with the Listen Foundation here. And I also teach in the fall up at CU. And do some early intervention as well in Colorado. But one of the big opportunities that I had a few years ago was to get licensed also in Wyoming and be able to serve some of your families and walk alongside and kind of mentor also some of your early intervention providers as well. Callie and I oftentimes discuss clients and share and collaborate together. And so I love that we can all work together to get the best outcome that we can and incorporate realizing that families are the best first teachers that our babies, our kiddos have. And so just kind of coming alongside and learning together in the trenches if there's ways that I can help out. One of the things that we have with the Listen Foundation is kind of a collaboration group of different professionals where we can consult. And one of those consults is Kristen Brainerd, who's an OT who works specifically with sensory integration. And it kind of became a big push when we started noticing. I myself, actually, as a parent, I have 21-year-old twins now and a 17-year-old, but when they were younger, we had many, I would say twice exceptional struggles, but also, hurrahs too. But one of them that comes along with dyslexia and ADHD and is sensory integration. And so I got to come through it firsthand as a parent when my little one was about 18 months and saw a huge difference. And then realized how all kids kind of need some sensory input. All people actually need sensory input. And so we'll kind of talk about that today, but I wonder how many of you are aware, I would love to know, are aware of kind of sensory integration, sensory processing, have heard it, have maybe used it or dabbled in it a little bit, or use it yourself to self-regulate. Anybody? Okay. Well, I see
I'll try. Yeah. I didn't know anything about it until I started working with you. And I feel like you just gently were like introducing ideas, because then you see that you use it for yourself too, because we're all, I feel like in parenting, we're just trying to stay regulated so that we can be good parents and not be completely overwhelmed.
Yeah.
But even like during our visits, there were so many times where he was just wanting like that crashing into things and rolling. And I was feeling overwhelmed because I'm like, how are we going to do kind of a
telehealth
visit where we have these objectives? Yeah, but we have a child who's like, woohoo. So that was the first time I had heard about it. And it's definitely been life changing for us.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting because you as parents really know your kids best. And sometimes we'll walk through this in just a second. I'll go ahead and share. It'll be the presentation that Nanette and I, Nanette is also a listening and spoken language therapist here in Colorado. And we collaborate often on different programs through the Listen Foundation. But we presented last year at Eddie on sensory processing and sensory integration. And so that's what I'll share with you. But one of the things that's important, right? We feel like with telehealth, which is kind of a game changer for services, but it feels like you have to stay front and center and have to sit at a table. And really, thankfully, because we're pretty mobile, we can give that grace to be like, okay, they either need a break or we need to do some jumping. How can we incorporate that without making each other sick by moving our computers, but also allowing for movement or whatever it is that the child may need, or that honestly, sometimes the parents need too. Just like, whoo, this is getting kind of, it feels really rigid and I need a break too. But feel free as we go through this, please do, if somebody else is just monitoring the chat in case somebody pop something in, that'd be great. If you'll just interrupt me, feel free to ask questions throughout as well. Okay, let me just make sure that we are ready to roll. Well, why isn't it letting me find it? Hold on. Let's try it one more time. There we go. Can you all see that now if I put it on screen view? Yes, good. Okay, so I can only see about one, two, three, four of you. So if somebody else like sees someone raising their hand, shout out to me, please. Okay. So we're just going to talk briefly about what sensory integration is. And like I said, this is just a picture of Nanette and I. We get to work together, but we also get to play together. She's very wise, and I love working together with projects with her as well. And we, like I said, contract with the Listen Foundation, which is a nonprofit that raises money for children who want to pursue listening and spoken language who have hearing loss. So what is sensory integration, right? It's really just the way that we process. Oops, can you guys still see it, or did I stop sharing? Okay, well,
I can still see. Yeah.
Okay, cool. It's really the way that we just take in information and process it in our world. It's our neurological processing and organization. And generally, we're not even aware of what we're doing, right? It's kind of just output coordination of everything that we do and kind of regulation of all the input that is coming into our system. So some of these maybe kiddos that you see, or some of these characteristics might be describe some of your kids, right? So as you take a look at this and you see, like, are some kids really sensitive to tags or to scratchy materials? Some kids may really crave crunchy snacks or really want a lot of input. Some kids may chew on a lot of things. It may be hard for them to fall asleep, or they really like to have footy pajamas on or in a sleep sack or a heavy blanket. If it's really loud, or if there's too much visual input or too much tactile input, you might see that meltdowns will occur. This could also be sometimes children just seem to be like super tough, right? They run into corners and don't even seem to flinch, whereas other kids may actually overreact to what doesn't seem like a very big impact or something like that. Or they really love to be squeezed or loved bear hugs, tickle games, maybe a crasher. So they come crashing into you and don't realize how heavy they're coming in. Maybe really sensitive to having their teeth brushed or their hair brushed, like to sit and be read to, but really aren't big and active. So you can see that there's a big gamut of differences from sensory seekers to sensory avoiders. And you can have a little bit of both in all kids and in all people, right? We all tend to have a sensory diet that we need that makes us feel safe and pulled together and just kind of regulated. But taking a look at some of these, realizing that some characteristics you may see in some of your kids sit with a W position, which kind of gives them a little more stability as opposed to core movement or core control. Maybe clumsy or may seem to trip over lots of transitions. This was kind of a big something that I noticed with my youngest. So he was an early walker and started walking at 10 months. And I figured that was the reason why he was just constantly tripping and falling, because they say the younger the walker, the more accident prone they tend to be because they don't have that fear yet. So I kind of chalked it up to that. But then even when he was still about 18 months, I noticed he was still really just, he would go from carpet to floor and wipe out, or he would kind of run into the side of the wall as he was coming through a doorway consistently, and was a toe walker, so was really receiving a lot of input. And so we sought out first physical therapy, but then also occupational therapy with a sensory integration specialist, and saw a change within, gosh, I think it was 2.5 months, just a totally different child. So as parents, like thinking about what are your goals for your child and what do you want for them to see? How hard are the behaviors that you may be struggling with? And maybe thinking too, like, what are the toughest times of day? So asking yourself, when your child is, maybe if they're running into things over and over, what are they getting from it? And so Kristen will even encourage us sometimes. And remember, Kristen is the OT that we can consult to either she's come into a couple sessions where they just kind of, she will observe our sessions, but then ask questions also, and maybe come up with some suggestions or ideas to see what might benefit your child and your family. But by us kind of going into the same situation that they are, if they're upside down a lot, or if they're crashing, or if they really like to be held tightly, or if they don't like light pressure, kind of doing that to yourself and thinking, what is their body needing from that? And what are they getting from the behavior that they're showing us? So sometimes we'll see kids love to be like kind of in a small space. And so what does that feed for them? And then also, what might their body be needing that we can offer to help them to get regulated? So there's primarily 3 different senses. There's actually more than that, but the 3 that we really work with are the tactile sense. And that's primarily through the surface of our skin. It's what you feel, that texture, shape, size, either by actively touching or just passively sitting on your skin. And it helps us tell the difference between threatening and safe sensations, and just an idea of how you take in information from just the tactile sense. Vestibular is information about gravity, where your body is with balance and movement. That's provided through the inner ear. It also is provided with that head and body position in relation to Earth's surfaces. So a lot of times we'll see our kiddos that might be more vestibular seeking to love to be upside down. And that can give them some input as well. So realizing that too, or maybe they like to swing a lot, or they like to spin, is another vestibular sense that can be fed by body movements. Proprioceptive is where your body is in space. So that's information that we get from our joints and our muscles. It helps to determine where our body is and what our body parts are doing. So sometimes when this is a struggle, you'll see that these are the kiddos that maybe run into door frames because they're not sure where their body is in relation to something else, or they might misjudge a step often and trip, or misjudge, cracks in the sidewalk, or a smaller step down. So what we know is that sensory integration, right, is important for a lot of different areas, right? It can really be required for so many daily living skills. So these are just some of them, and how they can impact academic skills and attention and auditory perception. For my youngest, I really noticed that even at 18 months, even though we had several developmental toys out, he really just kind of went from one to another and didn't really focus on much of anything, would touch things, but didn't focus much. And so after we started doing some of the sensory integration activities and feeding his little system, he really needed deep pressure. He really needed vestibular spinning. Then he was able to sit and attend, and to actually do some pretend play, and to interact, and to be able to sit and listen. And so we would oftentimes, on our way to the library, I knew that there was no way we were going to get through that library hour if we didn't do some spinning, some jumping. And so I knew after I dropped the twins off at kindergarten, we would usually stop at a park that had spinny equipment, and then we could head to whatever the outing was. Or if it was preschool for him, because I had work, they always appreciated if I could find a place to stop. So you can see too that it really does come into impact with eye-hand coordination, some fine motor skills, flexibility, kind of moving big things. What's your self-regulation skill in general? Are they able to self-comfort? Kind of that motor planning piece as well. So sometimes I'll see children who have a hard time with motor planning, even for speech, that once we feed the sensory system, they're much more capable and able to get clearer speech output and clearer vocalizations. Social skills, because that's all kind of a regulatory reading of what's expected and what am I supposed to be giving back. But if I'm so maybe overwhelmed by whatever my body is taking in, I may not be as aware of what's expected or what I can be doing. Visual perception skills, Muscle tone can really be affected too, and just healthy relationships. So thinking about how sensory integration challenges can occur, right? Sometimes it's when the brain is just not getting the right sensory message coming in from their own body or from the environment. It's kind of like it's on high alert all the time. Or sometimes the central nervous system isn't organizing the incoming information, and everyday sensations may either be barely noticeable or they may be over reacted to. So learning how or figuring out how to integrate that incoming information either from your own body. So for our kiddos who maybe don't realize when they're hungry or don't realize when they're thirsty or don't realize even sometimes when they're tired, we can kind of be the self-talking agent for them to begin with so that they can start to be aware, and help them learn to read their bodies a little bit better too. Oftentimes sensory integration challenges can occur on its own or with other diagnoses, including hearing differences. And so many of our kiddos will show us that they have some sensory integration cravings or some struggles. And so being aware and just being open to realizing we all have sensory integration kind of needs, right? That need to regulate our bodies. And when we can set the stage to really try and help them get what their body needs, they're going to be much more capable and apt to be open to whatever the therapy is, or to transitions throughout the day, or to trying new foods, or to, getting changed, or whatever it may be. So by being aware and just helping to set regulating maybe a diet in place, then we're going to be more apt to see some better outcomes as well, and to just have like a happier home life typically, because we all feed off of one another, right? So when somebody else is overwhelmed and maybe really dysregulated, it causes our responses to be sometimes exaggerated, or for us to be on end too. So when someone else is regulated, it also helps us to be more regulated. So we realized
Joanna,
that.
could I
Oh,
jump in really quick? Because
yes, please do.
I was thinking too, for us, we used it like incorporating some of those movements that Ivan was craving before our in-home, like early intervention visits, because they
Uh-huh.
were 30 minutes. And, if it took him 20 minutes to kind of like settle in, then by that time, like our time was over. Or
Yes.
when we were doing booth testing at the audiology clinic, knowing that that is a task where they're seated and they're so focused in order to get the results that we want, like reliable results. I found those are other occasions as well, like in addition to the ones that you mentioned, how it
Yeah.
just like you can incorporate it in all these small areas, and then, just have more, like you said, just more ease to your day and more.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
really setting yourself up for success, right? Once you
Mhm.
try and figure out what is their little body seeking and needing, and if we can feed it beforehand, then you have a better chance of a better outcome, right? So
Mhm.
we all have varying processing behaviors and sensory needs. The key is to find how we can help them get regulated. And so I actually have a slide here that we'll get to that really talks about how can we prep for an audiology session that will hopefully help it be a little more successful. Now I'm struggling. If I can see your pictures, I can't seem to go to my next slide. So hold on, thank you for interrupting me, because the only way that, oh wait, hey, let me try this arrow. Hey, look at that. So how are they identified, right? Oftentimes we will just observe through collecting information by their daily task. We can watch to see what they're doing, maybe take some notes. There's questionnaires that you can do. I will oftentimes, and Kristen too, will kind of do an interview. There is a standardized test. It's for a little bit older kids, which can be good too. And then of course, just clinical observations of their motor skills and their responses to sensory input. So thinking about, can we stop and look and observe and ask ourselves, are we looking for an increase in attention? Are we looking at more coordination that we'd like to see? Are we looking just for a calmer status overall? So thinking about what can we do to kind of help maybe identify what those little bodies are needing. So what are we noticing in our sessions, or what are you noticing throughout your day? What tend to be trigger times? What seems to always be a nightmare, not necessarily always behaviorally, but what do you notice? Or maybe you were caught off guard by a reaction that you were just like, what just happened? Why did that cause a meltdown? Or I was really surprised that there wasn't more of a reaction for our kids that need a little bit of their systems to be woken up. So thinking about what we can do to help by embedding just sensory play into their everyday, and just thinking, all right, this is an easy one that we could, like, there's a few things that we can just do by incorporating. Sometimes if you need that joint input, by doing animal walks up the stairs, or hey, can you walk like a crab into the kitchen on your way to get something? That's just some ways that we can help put some input in too. So giving some movement on purpose. So our vestibular kiddos, push-ups, swings, trampolines, exercise balls, spinning equipment, twirling, spinning, leapfrog. For our kids that are maybe less vestibular, like some kids really hate swings, don't like movement. So maybe realizing just walking places as opposed to running, getting awareness before moving them or having them move, holding hands when they're walking to give them a little more grounded feeling. For our tactile kiddos, providing different textures, sensory tables, Play-Doh, slime, shaving cream, compression clothing. Sometimes you'll see that your kiddos will put on clothes that almost look too small, but maybe that's their body telling you, oh, I really like this feeling of kind of a hug. Massages, kind of bear hugs. One of the great things for kids too might be if you've read The Mitten, or if that happens to be, you can make a burrito with a blanket and kind of make burritos with your kiddos. You're in the mitten, and that's one way too. Or sometimes we'll do making a pizza or making a burrito. And what do you put on the burrito? You like pull down beans, and then you'll sprinkle on cheese on their backs and down their legs. And then roll them up tight and kind of do that. Oh, I'm going to smush all the ingredients together, and just see if your kiddo seems to be really dysregulated, like far out and running wild. This can really pull them back in, right? And just help them re-regulate. If they're tactily defensive, sometimes giving them gloves or utensils with messy play, avoiding those compression clothings, or putting a compression clothing underneath something that they don't like, that's scratchy, or that they might not care for. Proprioceptive, remember that's where your body is in space. So giving those muscles some heavy work to do by pushing and pulling heavy things, shoveling snow, pushing brooms. My older son would wear coats, and he would come in with rocks in his coat pockets, probably for 2 years. And for the longest time, I'm like, what is happening? Why are we? And then I was like, oh, he really likes the weight of like that rock in his, and he would wear his coat all day long, which, sometimes as a mom, you're just like, this is, it's probably not the most socially appropriate thing, but I'm going to let it go because I've got other battles to fight, and this isn't going to be one of them. But realizing, I wonder if we do letting them wear that heavy backpack or play wrestling first, or climbing and running, can set the stage for then a more regulated system, so that maybe they are able to sit and feel more regulated. For our kids that are more proprioceptive defensive, limited hugs, maybe, doing a high five as opposed to a big hug, being cautious on playground equipment and around other kiddos. So for oral motor, maybe building up that awareness. Chucky, if you have kiddos that are big droolers, sometimes that's just calling awareness to it, and then giving some oral motor movement skills with play, with kazoos and chewing and sucking thick liquids through straws, maybe blowing bubbles or chewing gum, depending. We had a 5-year-old. I mean, that was the rule in our house. You had to be 5 to chew gum, which for our house worked great, but there's lots of other things they can chew on. So thinking about, this is just a picture too. This is one of my little guys who I was working with, and we were trying to get testing done, and his poor little body could not, like, oftentimes I do most of my sessions on the floor. Rarely we're at the table, but we were doing a test and his little body needed to be upside down. So this is his mama kind of holding him, and he did beautifully finishing up the standardized test. I think he was about 4 at this age. And sometimes you just kind of go with the flow and just see what we can do. And I had no problem. The fact that his little brain was able to see pictures without me having to turn it upside down was pretty curious to me, but he did great. So just realizing too that we can incorporate lots of movement either into therapy, but also before school or before you maybe go to library hour or to the dentist or to the audiologist visit. I feel like, let's see, is there one more slide here? Yeah. So what are some things that we can incorporate? That singing a hello song, incorporating Simon Says with auditory directions, maybe instead of just drawing, maybe we're having them do some body movements. Book sharing on your hands and knees, movement between breaks, encouraging families to, let me move my screen here, to feed that system before. For some language ideas, maybe we play with crawling, driving toys, stimulating. So if you think about when little kids play and develop, they're really down on their hands and knees, right? They're moving things and they're constantly kind of up and down. So you're changing position and planes. And then you're also getting lots of input just through your joints as you're crawling and as you're standing and as you're picking up one thing and then like maybe kind of moving back down kind of hard. So just thinking about how we can incorporate those into our sessions or into our day is a great way to kind of see what we can do. The freeze dance, setting up mini obstacle courses, those songs that where you have lots of movement, 5 Little Monkeys where you actually jump, the Hop Little Bunny song is great. So how about for audiology? What are some ways that we might be able to up our game a little bit to where we might increase the odds for them to be a little more regulated, allowing them to carry a backpack from the parking lot. Maybe it has lots of heavy books or blocks or something in it, giving them crunchy snacks so that they have beforehand, so that they have that sensory input also. Stop at a playground, especially if you have to drive for a little bit to get to the office. If there's a playground nearby the office and you can plan to be there and let them just play for 15 to 20 minutes before your session. Use some tactile play items. Maybe see if your audiologist is okay for some time with some sensory breaks. Deep squeezes for the child, or maybe bringing in something that they like. You know, they sell weighted stuffies, I think even at Target, and those can be really good to kind of carry with you and just have on your lap if you need them to sit for a little bit, those weighted stuffed animals. So a lot of this came from Kristen Brainerd as we've met with her together, and just kind of collaboration together with other families on what we can do to incorporate feeding and regulating that sensory system so that they feel calm, which means that we're all calm and able to kind of move through our sessions or through our day or whatever it is that you do as a parent, right? I do have another handout too, but are there some questions right now? I feel like I raced through that because I know that you had said we had about a half an hour and then you wanted to leave time for questions too, but I can go ahead and share. I'm going to stop sharing this one. Did that make sense? Did you guys have any questions on that and thoughts? Like maybe how do you think you might, what do you think you might try with your kiddos to see if it might help regulate their systems? Or what have you found helpful? If you are already, you may already be doing it and not even realizing that you're just following their lead and seeing what their body needs.
I just had a thought that weighted stuffed animals, Warmies is a brand that you warm it up in the microwave, but it's naturally kind of weighted.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be a helpful thing to
Yeah,
implement.
that's a great idea. Plus it gives even more of that tactile input of warmth, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Anybody else find anything that they've used that seems to be either calming, or if you have a kiddo who sometimes, not as often as I seem to see kiddos that are high energy, but sometimes I'll see kiddos that are really like super calm, right? Where you're like, come on, wake up the system. And so sometimes they'll actually need a little bit of like input, and they're the ones that sometimes need the softer kind of rubbing, not the super deep, because that sometimes calms the system. We need to wake up those little systems that tend to be our like not really wanting to move, or really like to just sit and be held, or like to sit and look at books, but we want to see more movement. So sometimes we'll actually need to kind of wake up and do tickling that's not as deep pressure as what we do with our kiddos that seem to be real dysregulated. Okay, so let me go ahead and share one more, and I can send this, Olivia, to you as well if you'd like to send out. Here we go. Can you guys all see this? I'm struggling with a whole bunch of things open. Okay, so the first one I think that we see is the proprioceptive. So what are some things that we could do for that body awareness in space, right? We've mentioned a few of them, but these are like this squished by a yoga ball. Of course, not like where it's unsafe, but where you put it on their back and you roll it over them kind of deeply, right? Having them crawl through, over and under and through those, you know, those tunnels that you can get where kids can climb through them, but then they fold up really nice and flat so that they're not just sitting out all the time in your living room. Bouncing on a yoga ball. So I actually, as I'm giving this talk, I don't know if you guys are able to see me, but I have, this is just called a, oh, what's it called? It's like a squishy. It'll come to me in a second. But it'll help me just to, I guess, keep regulated. But then I'm also sitting on one of the yoga ball. I have like a yoga ball chair. And so in my office, when kiddos come here, we'll oftentimes use this as like, how many bounces do you want? We'll put it as part of our schedule of when we incorporate. I typically will incorporate schedules with most of my kiddos that are over the age of 3, just so that they have an idea and they get to choose what are we going to do for part of it too. But it almost always has at least 1 or 2 pieces where we're going to incorporate some movement, whether that's dancing, singing, bouncing on the ball, animal walks, or I have a book too that's called Animal Movement that has a spinny, and then it says like walk like a crab, or slither like a snake. So we'll incorporate those too, but for those proprioceptive, massaging, deep pressure, like I said, either making a pizza, pretending that their back is a pizza and you have to like spread the sauce. And then do you want pepperonis, pop, 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 where you're kind of pushing deeply on them. And then you like have to cook it. And so that's going to be your warm after it's done, after you've put the cheese. Pillow fights, weighted stuffed animals that we talked about. For the vestibular input, swinging, spinning, rolling on a yoga ball, sliding back and forward, again, tipping upside down, rocking horses, rolling down a hill, going for wagon rides, blanket rides throughout the house can be good too. I had to kind of forgo what I thought was allowable in my household, right? Like I wasn't ever allowed to jump on the furniture, and so I still didn't let my kids like stand on the furniture and jump, but I did allow them to like do a forward roll and crash into the couch. And we did have one broken window with that incident, but then we had to change what our rules were. And we ended up getting a trampoline. And so there's lots of ways that we can feed the system, right? And then our basement kind of became an obstacle course that we could change around too. For that tactile and oral input, right? Different blowing games like we talked about, eating crunchy snacks, cold or spicy foods. Some kids that are maybe seeking it really like spicy foods. Blowing whistles, kazoos, blowing bubbles, tactile by gluing and buttoning, massaging the child's body with maybe a soft cloth, putting on lotion, writing on sidewalk chalk, stretching, clapping, just giving them a variety of different textures too, just like we would with babies. We need to give the input orally of different textures as well. Lego plays can really help with that fine motor as well. Yeah, so I will send these also to you, Olivia, if you want to disperse them. That work?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
We
great.
normally send kind of a recap email and everything, so we could include that with it. I like how you organized too by the different systems.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. So maybe I could encourage you this week to just kind of watch your kiddo and think about what is their body getting from what they're doing, and maybe what is their body needing? Like what are they getting from it? But then what does that tell us that they might be needing or wanting? And then I'll encourage you too to imitate what it is that they're doing, and how does that feel for us. If you're not used to going upside down often, you might surprise yourself with how dizzy you get from doing it. But that kind of tells us too that, wow, we're staying kind of in the same plane as adults, much more so than we used to when we were younger. And so it's actually really good for us too, not to the point of getting sick, but to the point of just like exercising our own bodies and getting us more regulated in different planes as well. Yeah. So questions, I feel like I just kind of went through it fast and furious, but. What have you noticed that your kiddos maybe prefer or gravitate towards?
I was just going to say thank you, Joanna, because, I have tried to employ some of these things with my kids that we've talked about, especially Finn. And I know it like particularly drives my husband crazy when, like one day Finn, they just fighting reading and doesn't want to do his reading homework, but he was running into the bed. So I was like, well, if you read a page, then you could run into the bed. And, my husband's like, this is going to take forever. And it's like, yeah, but he's doing his reading and he's getting it done and it's not a fight. So we have to sit here for 5 minutes longer so he can be, getting that sensory input and, at the dinner table, as long as he's kind of sitting up and his head is above the table, not his feet, then, I think one of the hardest things I have, because I know I need a lot of sensory input, is that when we do listening practice with you, Joanna, Finn is a fidgeter like I am, but he's always tapping things or his like kicking his feet and making noise. And it's like, dang it, like, can we find something quiet for you to fidget with? But it seems like he really likes that auditory kind of input also.
Well, usually the listening check's pretty quick, but it's called a nido. So these are and they're all over now, actually, I think I found this one in Walgreens, but like this would be a good quiet kind of fidget that is just malleable. And once they get air in them, then they're no longer good, but they're like $6. So you can get another one when they break. But so yes, I think that realizing, and sometimes let's just say like you're going to go out to eat and you know that you really can't be all over the place, right? And so I wonder if stopping on your way or prepping the body beforehand would be helpful to at least giving you 15 to 20 minutes of the ability to stay at the table or, yeah. That's great. Thank you for sharing that.
I was thinking about my son and just how his needs have changed over the last few years too. Like how much in the beginning we were doing the spinning and the vestibular and balance stuff, and how we really don't do a lot of that anymore. It's interesting just how their bodies, I guess, change. Is that just the brain kind of adapting?
It truly is. And their neurodevelopment just kind of starts to regulate on its own. And maybe they figured out like I think when kids are developing, because everything's growing and changing, especially when they're little, like from that, I don't know, 2 to 4 range, everything's growing and changing constantly. So they're needing more input to figure out where am I in space because everything's growing so quickly. but I think then sometimes too, once you get regulated, they know what it is to feed the system. And so they may be doing it on their own. They found their own way to do it, or their body just doesn't need it so much. Then sometimes something else pops up that you're like, I never saw that before. Where did that come from? And that's just kind of, I think, how development works. Or, they discover a sport like swimming or gymnastics or, tumbling or hockey, where you're really having to work on all of this balance and control. And so that feeds so many of the systems at once. But maybe when they were younger, they weren't able to coordinate all of that. And so they really needed the deeper pressure and the actual joint compression that they're getting from crawling and swinging, versus when they're older, they're still getting joint compression, but it's probably, running into the side of the walls on skates or whatever. Yeah. So it is really interesting how when I look back and I look at all the things that we had for our sensory diet, and I would give them, that's another thing that I didn't mention, but if you make a list of activities that feed the system and ask them, which one do you think you'd like to do right now? Or pick two and we'll pull those two activities out, giving them a little bit of leeway in choosing what and helping them determine, and talking through that too of, looks like your body could really use this right now. And then afterwards, wow, your body looks like it feels calmer. How does it feel? So we're really talking about that awareness, right? And that could be us too, as parents, saying, wow. I mean, sometimes it was my husband that would say, whoo, you seem like you need to go for a run. Like, and other times when I'm feeling super amped up, then I could just say, wow, I need to get outside, or I really need to go for a run or go for a swim. And because right now I'm just really kind of feeling frustrated by everything. So by us sharing our own self-talk is really going to help them become more aware too, and just see that we all have these sensory needs. Or maybe I'm just weird because I still need to talk and as I'm using Anito and move. But no, we all have sensory needs and sensory inputs. But as we grow and become adults, you kind of learn how to feed that yourself, but our little ones need help in being able to figure out what can help them feel more regulated. And then they're much more capable of receiving input and of giving output as well, with listening, spoken language, sign, whatever it may be. They're going to be more apt to give and take and be open to what we're hoping they're going to gather.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today and taking some of your time out to visit with us about this.
Sure.
Is there any questions that anyone has? I don't think there is. The only other thing I was going to ask you, Joanna, is your name also comes up when it comes to love and logic and parenting and that type of thing. And I just didn't know if you had any upcoming trainings or any resources when it comes to that we should know.
I don't have any upcoming trainings right now. I probably will next year, but I may be able to, how often do you guys do first and thirds? Just through the school year?
Yeah, we follow that school calendar.
Okay. So maybe let's chat maybe April or May. I might be able to sneak into one more if you would like it. I just couldn't do it week after next because it's our spring break.
Yes,
but,
that's okay.
The Love and Logic Institute, if you go to loveandlogic.com, they have, or actually, if you just look online through YouTube, you can find tons of little shorts. And they actually have the parenting, the painless preschool years was kind of one that's a little older now, but is really good. And then the Magic for Early Years book is, so I facilitated two classes. One is the birth to 6, which is the Magic for Early Years. And then Raising Responsible Kids is the one that's 6 to, I think it goes, well, it's supposed to be through teens, but, and there'll be lots of shorts that you can find. And if you sign up for the Love and Logic they call it the Insider Club, where they'll send you one email a week. And it just kind of keeps it fresh in your mind if you've read it, but then maybe watching a short clip or a video will just refresh kind of what maybe you've learned a little bit of. and hopefully keep it at the forefront of your mind so that you can remember like, oh, okay, if I'm going to give choices, how would I word that? Or how can I make this into an enforceable statement, right? Of like, happy to take kids whose shoes are all put away, or I'm happy to take kids, happy to give sweet treats to kids who eat their grow strong foods, whatever, right? Those are things that I can do instead of like, no dessert because you didn't eat it, right? That's just inviting a meltdown, which happens, right? That's part of it, but yeah. Okay.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds great. I wrote a few of those down too, so that'll be good.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to stop our recording here. Here we go.